FBI take note. False meme promoted by John Hopkins University. Has the curve flattened? JHU state flattening the curve incorrectly so that even if the government did nothing, they could take credit for flattening the curve. Note to censors: we use only government data. If you have a problem with the results, speak to the government. Note to censors: this information may be used in evidence in a prosecution. Tampering with the evidence, including suppressing it, is a crime. I have twice today come across the same false meme. I didn't go looking for it. I simply wanted accurate information for a study of US city and state case and death figures. What is the biggest crisis facing the world today? COVID-19 and the government's associated policies. What are two of the key memes and strategies associated with those government actions? Lockdown and flattening the curve. Given the extreme damage being done to liberty, our livelihoods and our way of life, as well as the massive hit to our economies, there can be no more important topic to get right. John Hopkins University of Medicine styles itself variously as John Hopkins University, John Hopkins Medicine, John Hopkins Medicine Coronavirus Resource Center. I'm sure that no academic or director or officer of any John Hopkins affiliate will want to discover that their prestigious name is promoting a profoundly false and misleading meme, and so will take action to correct and apologize for this mistake. John Hopkins University of Medicine prides itself on being at the forefront of the international response to COVID-19. John Hopkins' intent is to inform the public and brief policymakers in order to guide a response, improve care, and save lives. How strange that a false and profoundly misleading meme should be promoted by one of their key articles. They are a highly regarded aggregator of COVID-19 data, relied upon by websites for their updates on COVID-19 as here, which I found while checking Boston's figures. They have their students take the Hippocratic Oath, here Oath of Hippocrates. And I will abstain from all intentional wrongdoing and harm. Are they sure they don't mean the Hippocratic Oath? I will abstain from all intentional wrongdoing and harm unless I'm well paid, and will keep silent when I know a lie is being spoken because I fear for my job. But I'm saving lives, really. Well, now it's time to call out all the heads of departments of John Hopkins University. I'm tired of being harangued that it's all about saving lives when it's all about saving lies. Every one of these individuals is in a well-paid job at a prestigious university. Now we get to see if they have integrity or whether all their fine words on their website are just BS. Because their COVID-19 resources homepage advertises an article that is such a fundamental misrepresentation that it cannot be made by any competent, and I mean undergraduate or graduate, mathematician or epidemiologist. Just like Professor Ferguson accidentally exaggerated Hubei and South Korea 150 and 1300 times respectively, and Boris Johnson accidentally failed to get anyone competent to review Professor Ferguson's work, and he accidentally failed to check whether there were any already completed contagions to compare against, and he accidentally put us into lockdown when the mortality figures showed that putting anyone younger than 40, arguably 50, into lockdown with no contrary symptoms or weakness was an utter waste of time, because in country after country it's almost impossible to die of COVID-19 below those ages, and real life is hundreds of times more dangerous. And he and all his prestigious scientists accidentally failed to notice that lockdown wasn't working, and accidentally advertised that it was working, using utterly false memes like the rate of growth of new cases is slowing down. Here, the BBC, official organ of the UK state, since last weekend the daily growth in new cases has fallen away from the long-term trend. utterly false. But do you know why? Our regular viewers do. From the very beginning, what is the one critical feature that we were looking for to defeat the exponential meme? Curl over. Curl over. The point at which the linear exponential looking phase of a logistic curve is over, and you know the crisis is over. It's not exponential, and you can define the likely end total by projection. The logistic function, or curve as here drawn, a standard and recognized curve that, as it happens, looks a lot like a normal distribution cumulative curve, even specifically referencing COVID-19. Here in its daily cases form, not cumulative, mirroring Ferguson's 510,000 deaths scenario almost perfectly. So close to the normal distribution that either of them, normal or logistic, provides a near perfect fit for Ferguson's 510,000 deaths. And so close to the log normal distribution, which does produce a perfect fit for Ferguson's 510,000 deaths. And it's a model which may spread exponentially in the early stages. Do you recall any government, media or scientific source remembering to point out that the exponential looking growth of the virus is only for a few days or a short period? Even Ferguson, for all his sins in inventing an egregiously exaggerated figure, only stated that he seeded the model with an exponential figure, i.e. it started exponentially, but then what? Ferguson's output from his model, or his imagination, given that he utterly ignored Hubei and South Korea, both completed by the time he published his report, looks like this: normal. Not exponential, not climbing in a straight line on log scales until the whole world becomes infected and we all need a vaccine. Normal, not exponential, like the chart explaining flattening the curve. Normal, not exponential, like Australia's daily cases. Normal, not exponential, like this graphic from Lancet. Normal, not exponential, like South Korea's daily curve available to Ferguson with figures a tenth that of Hubei, with its grand total of 266 deaths to the present day. Normal, not exponential, like Hubei in daily cases and deaths, with 3,085 deaths for a population of 59 million. Yet Ferguson claimed 510,000 for 66 million. And even the UK looks normal, not exponential, despite the UK's bizarre relationship to data. But I forgot, that's because of lockdown. Let's utterly nail this so that for once perhaps the zombie stays dead. We use normal in preference to logistic for most purposes because guess what? Excel provides very handy support for normal and none for logistic. We're not modelling, we're not predicting the end of the world and UK society, which his model created, rather than warning us about. We use it only to illustrate the obvious. Normal, whether logistic or normal or log normal, are not exponential, that pink curve which seen so often to scare you. And normal, logistic, log normal aren't anything like exponential on log scales either. While exponential is heading off to scare you, normal humped curves are fading away. And there's the lie being propagated by Wikipedia, implied but almost certainly intended to be such, and by John Hopkins explicitly. But where? If these are the daily case curves for a nominal COVID-19 country, as we've seen for Hubei, for South Korea, for Australia, and every country without exception in our chart updates, then these are the cumulative or total curves that arise from the daily cases curves, the classic sigmoid or S-curve, because it looks like an italic S. Add in exponential, and the dailies are crushed, the totals are dwarfed, and that exponential curve is climbing to the moon, the curve that launched the lockdown, and the whole Western world bought it. That is not a very useful chart, needless to say, but with one tiny and magical adjustment, two actually, we get this. Focus on normal or logistic, but here we've chosen normal, and we get a top curve that guess what? Flattens. That's the totals curve. It has nothing to do with lockdown, it has nothing to do with social distancing. It is an intrinsic property of the normal distribution. Here's logistic, it's slightly fatter feet, more obvious on log scales, but again, the curve flattens as a total. And it's nothing to do with lockdown or social distancing. It's what viral contagion curves, logistic curves, do anyway. And here's the problem with lazy language, everyday language, because here we're referring to the levelling off of the top cumulative curve because it can't drop, can it? You can't have fewer cases today than yesterday, can you? Except you can, but only if the government revise the data. And guess what the UK government just did? 2711 new cases on the 19th of May, minus 525 new cases on the 20th of May. Thank you for buggering up the data, but whatever. The critical point is that any curve which in daily cases starts small, rises, reaches a peak, then declines, i.e. is humped or peaked, will flatten. It is the arithmetic of the curve and has nothing to do with lockdown or social distancing. Any virus which displays a normal or humped propagation will flatten. Even an Egyptian virus will flatten. It doesn't have to be normal, it just has to go up and go down. A bit scary, then it's all over. And note, we put the pyramid on the second axis, else it gets dwarfed by the total, as here. But you know what? As long as we understand that this S-curve for totals is what we're looking for, who cares about the daily daces? It's understood. We can just drop it. And now all we have is two curves. The real world S-curve, normal, log normal, logistic, Egyptian, who cares, as long as it's a peaked or humped curve. And the mythical exponential virus. The damage now wrought by lazy epidemiologists who used exponential without regard to their audience must now be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. I hope their university paychecks and insurance will cover that, because we've been fighting the propaganda abusing their lazy language since day one, and we're still fighting it. And here's our critical tool, log scales, because as well as showing detail at lower levels, we'll bring the pyramid back for a sec, it also straightens exponential curves. Wow, don't that look funky? Kind of neat actually. But here's the thing, that scary pink exponential is now a straight line, and only exponential curves go straight. If it bends on a log scale chart, it isn't exponential, full stop. No debate, no argument, that's it. Just because in lazy everyday speech exponential is rapidly increasing, I think it's fair to say we're in a world crisis, so the time for lazy language and any excuses is past. Straight on log scale equals exponential, not straight equals not exponential. No virus, not theoretically, not actually, is ever exponential, even at the beginning, because exponential means one thing, growth rate constant. And a characteristic of these humped curves is that their growth rate is declining from day one. If day 2 is twice day 1, the next day will be not quite twice day 2, and the day after that it will be not quite twice day 3. It's intrinsic to the normal, logistic and log normal distributions. It's even characteristic of our Egyptian distribution. Here's the cases .c, total.t, rate C1 over C0, C2 over C1, etc. and growth, change of rate R1 over R0. No, not that R0 or R0, though it's probably where R0 got its name from, and it's an initial rate. Notice R0, an initial rate immediately followed by R1, R2. How much did you hear about R1, R2 to R60, the rate 60 days later? Nothing, because they wanted you focused on the doubling every 3 days, not only but only for the first day. Not even the first 3 days, strictly speaking, it goes down every day. Did they remember to tell you that? That there's a reason it's called the basic reproduction number? Because that's basically only good for the first day or so. Yet you were told time and time again that you had to be afraid because of the exponential nature of virus growth. Thank you, Bill Gates. And the R0 was the figure that decided how fast it was. No and no. Never ever was so. Lied to from the very beginning, and lazy epidemiologists never corrected the lies. People have asked me for simpler charts, simpler explanations. It is as simple as this. You don't need maths, you don't need arithmetic, you only need to be able to tell the difference between a straight line and a curve. Here's exponential, 115% every day, 100% identical every day. That's exponential, that's a straight line. Everything else is a curve, whether it's wriggly, squiggly, jagged, it doesn't matter. One last thing about the mythical exponential. That's day cases dotted and cumulative solid line using our standard display in our chart updates. For exponential after the first few days, the total also looks exponential. Strictly, it approaches it asymptotically, but you don't need to know that. 2 straight lines and a crisis that never was. All you need is an eyeball. If you see curves, it's not exponential and likely a perfectly normal virus propagation, which will grow then fade out because that's what viruses do, and our immune system hurries them on their way. Straight equals exponential, curved equals not exponential. It's as simple as that, no maths required, and it's on log scales. On linear, in the early days, is trickier, because everything's going up fast. But that does not mean it's exponential, any more than firing a bullet into the sky means it's going into orbit. You can check, and that's how we prove that lockdown had 0 effect in the UK, because you can look for that diminishing growth rate, which for humped curves, normal, logistic and log normal, is there from the very beginning. But when someone shows you this, as Thomas Pueyo et al. Did, it's easy to believe they're exponential, but mainly because on linear scales you can't distinguish exponential from non-exponential, which is why fraudsters love linear. And notice he really is very sophisticated. He includes charts that contradict his exponential meme, but he actually uses it to reinforce his lockdown meme. They learned how viral and lethal it could be, so they knew to take it seriously. That's why all of their graphs, despite starting to grow much earlier, still don't look like exponentials. No, they don't look like exponentials because no virus grows exponentially. Exponential is a term used by lazy epidemiologists for near exponential growth for a few generations, days, which rapidly reduces to what we call the linear phase, climbing straight for a bit on log scales as it continues to reduce in rate and enters the curl-over phase, and then we know the crisis is over. It's not and never was exponential. His strategy is very pertinent, as it's what we'll see with John Hopkins. Pueyo co-opts the mechanism of the host to infect the body just like a virus, but this is an information virus co-opting truth and replacing it with his agenda. Here he annotates the graphic so it seems as if the Chinese measures were the cause of the shape of the curve. That is completely undetermined, and we'll give you a simple example why. I give 50 patients suffering from fever my patent anti-fever pill. In 25 patients, their fever drops. My pill is effective in 50% of cases. True or false? I'll give you a few seconds. Here it is again. I give 50 patients suffering from fever my patent anti-fever pill. In 25 patients, their fever drops. My pill is effective in 50% of cases. True or false? False. It may be true, but it is not yet proven to be true, and may be completely false. What is necessary to understand what actually happened? A control, a second group who did not take the pill. I give 50 patients my patent pill and 25 have the fever drop. I give 50 patients an anti-fever potion, tap water, and 25 have the fever drop. What difference did my patent pill make? 25 versus 25, none. That is the test that Pueo omits, and he uses the same trick later with South Korea, who are rightly proud that they did not use lockdown. We've already shown you that South Korea was a near perfect fit for normal and log normal, but showing both played down the significance of one particular element. The log normal fit is uncanny, so good that the real Korea data obscures the pink theoretical line for much of its length. If you sprinkle magic fairy dust on a bowling ball and it doesn't change direction at all, can you really claim you made the ball create a strike? In South Korea, the virus did exactly what a virus was supposed to do, else it wouldn't be such a perfect fit. The measures taken by the South Korean government may have had an effect, but they did not affect the outcome of this contagion. That's a critical distinction. Did they prevent further contagions, or did the virus just lose against the human race? That's a discussion for PhDs when we're not at risk of people like Pueo and Gates, two of the most dangerous people on the planet right now given their influence, inserting their narrative and infecting a natural occurrence. To see how we prove that lockdown in the UK has had zero effect, see our earlier videos. However, it is precisely by having control examples in place, a no lockdown projection and the reduction of growth rate in the virus from day one, continuing unchanged by lockdown. Speaking of which, let's take a look at the mendacity of this BBC article. But first, let's just state what we mean by curlover. Long-standing viewers will already know, and it should be pretty obvious once we've pointed it out. This is a screenshot of a page from our original 24th March presentation with 23rd March data point. I could not let the absurdity of lockdown stand, given that we were so close to being free of the virus. It's been a long and difficult 2 months since then. And it turns out that this government does not want us to be free of the virus. We'd have attained peak as we did on April 11th, 12th, barely 3 weeks later, and we could have coasted downhill and lauded our courage. Instead, just as we came close to peak, the virus stopped acting like a virus. But viruses don't do that. Of course, if the reported figures stop looking like a virus, it's not the virus that's reporting the figures. But curlover. Exponential redline is what the media threatened us with. Curl over, any curve sick, curling over to flat. Imagine you're in a field with a large 4x4 racing towards you. When do you know you're safe and it's not going to hit you? If it keeps going straight at you, you're not safe. But are you safe only when it's driven past? The moment you see its trajectory altered so that it's no longer pointing at you, that's enough. Strictly, its velocity vector is no longer at you. It can point sideways and still hit you, e.g. turning the wheel on ice, or even starting to turn on ice might not change the trajectory enough. The moment you see that the virus trajectory is not a straight line, exponential, then you know the crisis is over. The contagion will continue, but you now have two benefits. You know it's not exponential, you can project a curve to a definite flat line. If you try to project an exponential curve straight line on log scales, you have a problem. It just keeps going straight and heading for the moon. Unless, of course, Bill Gates is in charge when it magically turns. You can't have it both ways. It's either exponential or it isn't. It isn't. It never was. Here's a chart from our very next update, March 26, which included projections using the Mark 1 eyeball. It's not rocket science, it's not prediction. All we needed was to keep the curve smooth. Technically today I could do a fit using normal distributions or logistic curves, but that was then, a much more innocent time. And that simple insight to project the curves turned out to be a critical decision because of what we then did. We locked the projection as our best guess of where it was going prior to lockdown. The shape of our UK projection had to be consistent to my eyes with the existing curve. That existing curve was defined by that long, sweeping and gently curling climb. Italy and Norway already had long and well-developed curvature. I had a high degree of confidence that they were reasonable curves. It would be interesting to see how well I did with that. The UK too, I did rather well, but not in the way I'd imagined. If you throw a paper dart and watch it gently descending to the ground, is that magic fairy dust or gravity? If you throw a rock at the paper dart and it hits and the dart plummets to the ground, yeah, you sure changed its trajectory. Lockdown was throwing a rock at the virus. Zero market for new virus candidates, in theory, after the incubation period, 5 to 15 days. And yet within days the government couldn't help themselves, claiming early victory. That BBC article was 6th April, literally 2 weeks, the earliest that incubation could be said to be over, and it was now new, in lockdown, and no more cases. Except there were, and there were, and there were, until the virus wasn't even behaving like a virus anymore, and I realized with a truly profound sense of loss that we were never getting out of this. But at least I could prove one thing. Lockdown hadn't changed a thing, and that was absurd. Here's our chart from our 16th of May update. Now if that blue line was the UK and the pink line our projection, then finally it would show that lockdown had begun working mid-April. Except it's the opposite. Far from being hit by a rock, it was the UK pink line which continued to track our projection perfectly, and then in mid-April it just kept going higher. This image is truly extraordinary, and I feel a bit proud of it because we set the projection based on its curve to that point and the assumption that it would be similar to Italy, Norway, etc. We set that curve when the UK was at less than 10,000 cases, yet it held good all the way until it said it was time to quit at 114,000 cases, time to slow down and seriously curl over. So an eyeball glance a month before was good enough to track 10 times out. Not bad, except it meant that lockdown hadn't changed a goddamn thing. And then, far from the virus slowing down, it now just adds cases in an arithmetic fashion, neither exponential, nor normal. Truly, it is no longer normal. But no matter, because our task now has become one of highlighting lies and deception, and there's plenty to go around. So back to the BBC. We've told you about normal curves, humped curves, that exponential is a straight line, and notice the chart to the left is log scale, that virus progressions are never exponential despite lazy epidemiological language. Responsible articles admit as such. So can you spot what's wrong with this chart? What's the only straight line on that chart? And what have they called it? Trend. And gosh, look at that, it was going higher, but lockdown is working, which is why the daily cases are falling away. Are you getting it yet? Let's swap context. Here's a slide from our 9th of April video, Curve Primer, which I recommend for people still grappling with the issues of curves and trajectories. Indeed, there's a lot of good stuff in older videos, and yes, we do to a degree take for granted that you've watched them. In a sense, we're making an exception here, because the fraud is so fundamental, we need to cover the basics in depth to ensure the fraud is entirely clear. Here's the next slide with a trajectory thrown in. Now I reckon the boy is throwing and the girl catching from hand positions, but we'll reverse that and add a trend line. I'll put it full screen. What's the floor? Yes, that ball was going to the moon. Lucky for the boy that we sprinkled our magic fairy dust and made the ball curl down so he could catch it. This illustrates a common technique also shown with reducing no lockdown 530,000 deaths repeated in extending lockdown announcement apparently to 5,700 now that you're obeying. Start with one lie and then you can lie to take credit for what was going to happen anyway. Here the ball was always coming down. And what about the BBC chart? It's not much and we may have to go to the dreaded number crunching, but there's a hint of curl-over already present. It's not definitive, but this is why we did our rate analysis. However, there's also an easy trick to detect curvature. It's all down to your wonderful eyes. No, seriously, I think they're wonderful. When I gaze into them, I see dark pools of mystery, the very depths of your soul. I feel, am I getting off topic? Okay, weird. That's the absurdity of this whole pack of lies. You don't need maths, you just need eyes. For those with eyes to see, let them see. I have to explain the arithmetic for those who might build on this or have the experience to integrate it into their own work, but nobody needs the maths to see what needs to be seen. And that's as here that the chart is already curling over, and that lockdown hasn't changed that, or has it? Notice that they save us having to answer that question for now, as they've already lied. The trend line is a lie because no virus trends in a straight line exponentially. That's all of these images that we show you, humped curves that peak and descend, not lines that accelerate off to infinity, not exponential. So their trend line is already a lie because no virus grows exponentially. Not even in the very beginning. The growth rate is always diminishing. But do the BBC compound that lie with a second lie? If the chart was already curved and is merely continuing to curve, then they're saying what it was doing anyway is thanks to lockdown. Lockdown makes the sun rise. Lockdown makes things fall to earth. Lockdown is the reason we have tides. Once you start with a lie, after that you can prove anything. If what will happen is what was going to happen anyway, the government can claim that paying for MPs' free holidays to the Caribbean saved the UK. Look, the virus is curling over, thanks to our holidays in the Caribbean. And that would be a blessing and a godsend compared to what they're really doing. I'd love it if they'd gone off to the Caribbean. Imagine how much less damage they'd have done. No cessation of democracy, no eradication of consent, no removal of liberty, no ending our capacity to earn, no propaganda on the TV, no lies in the media, no shutdown of our economy, no restrictions on travel, no end to proper schooling, no social distancing, no queues just to enter a shop, and no vaccine. Please, for God's sake, off to the Caribbean. Based on a lie, who cares? It would be far less damaging than what you're doing instead. But does the chart show that Covid-19 is a normal virus? Is the chart, in fact, already curling over? The red arc suggests yes, but it's not exactly compelling. Let's try a simpler test. Draw a line between the start and end points and trust your eyeball. No maths required. And I typed it no mather required. Well, true as well, I guess. Back to normal life and trying to pay the bills. So, with that line in place, is there a bulge above or below? Clearly there's a bulge above, so it starts low, goes above the yellow line, then comes back down to meet it. It's curved. Think of a bow, and the line is the string. Do the chart elements form the bow? Don't trust that? Alright, put a line outside the bars and see if it rests at the ends, the middle, or all the way along. By the way, notice that that's roughly what their trend line does, and notice they started it halfway up to avoid people noticing just this point. The subtlety with which the liars adjust their information is extraordinary. They know how to manipulate because it's the little things, the traps they avoid or set, like stopping that line short of where the bow would have been obvious. By the way, notice that I'm agreeing with them as to the gradient. It is a reasonable fit as a tangent to the curve, but a tangent isn't a trend line. And that's the difference between exponential and 530,000 deaths and normal and a few thousand. Yes, there's a lot more reported deaths than 3,000 now, but that's another story. The reported figures for the virus stopped looking like a virus a long time ago. So how's our external red line? Notice how there's a lot of air underneath that red line, more so at the ends than in the middle. Yup, definitely got a hint of bowing there, but how to make it definitive? Simple, make our own chart. Their chart looks to be March 1st to 5th April, so here's the World Health Organization data going back to the first cases on 31st January. They've cherry-picked the 1st March to April 5th as there's more data available, but do I mind? No, looking at it, that's the period I'd assess to learn something, but I wouldn't disregard or hide the history as they have done. The lead was real, they should have acknowledged that. Maybe they did. No matter, we're good. The next thing is we're going to use our easy trick for detecting curlover. Add a line between the endpoints and see if it bows, i.e. forms a bow literally like a bow and arrow, appropriate for a trajectory, yeah? So that's pretty clearly bowed. That's enough to defeat their claim and show that they lied, that it was already slowing down. But wait, we should be careful, and there's another lie. Notice they've included the grey box for when under lockdown, so we must be clear that the chart was already curling over before lockdown. Here's our grey box deliberately matching theirs from 23rd April, and ask yourself why I emphasize that. Now I could say that's clearly curved before then, but how do we test? Add another line, two in fact, one conservative, dashed, and one naively to lockdown begins. The curve is still bowed above that line, it was curving before lockdown, lie established, thank you, prosecute the lying BBC. But what's the other lie I mentioned? Hint, you go to the gym to lose weight, and instantly your weight drops, yes? The virus incubates. It will be 5 to 10 days before symptoms show. So anyone getting the virus just before lockdown will show up as a case in the first 5 to 10 days of lockdown. If the government made having babies illegal, women would still be having babies 9 months later that were conceived legally. Even the government, astonishingly, admitted that lockdown wouldn't have an effect for 14 days, yet here we are, lockdown announced late on the 23rd, so the 24th is the first day of lockdown, 5th of April, the 13th day of Virusmas. So none of this chart is officially guaranteed lockdown data. Yes, if lockdown is having an effect, we'd expect a slight effect as of the 5th, useful effect as of the 10th, and full effect from the 14th onwards. And guess what? If you ignore that it was already curling over, that's what the naive will see and what the government wants you to see. So the red is their misrepresentation. It's a more polite word for lie, but they didn't lie. They said it's when lockdown begins. And that's another technique, omission of facts critical to the interpretation. Like omitting that a province the size of England and Wales had completed the virus with 3085 deaths, like omitting that a nation of 50 million people, a little under England, was over with 104 deaths at the time of lockdown. Over as in so far past peak, we're back in the foothills. New cases would dribble in, the occasional death, but the crisis was over. And somehow Ferguson omitted to mention that. Like omitting that countries like Italy and Norway were already showing strong curlover. As such, they had well-defined trajectories that were going to go nowhere near 53 million infected, a figure of pure invention. So with Ferguson grievously misrepresenting the facts, and the BBC grievously misrepresenting the facts, how about John Hopkins? Are they indeed a profound beacon of truth amidst so many lies? John Hopkins proudly position themselves as saviours of the world, and a lot of people do indeed rely on them for their data. So naturally the public and policymakers might rely on them, and John Hopkins are here to guide a response, improve care, and save lives. So here's their homepage for their Coronavirus Resource Centre. No doubt it's highly popular right now. Maybe we should check the search rankings, but no matter. It's big, I'm sure. And here we have down below an article that intrigued me given the failure of the UK curve to flatten. So naturally I clicked and then was totally gobsmacked, not believing what I was reading. I'm not going to quote it as I normally do. This really needs screenshots, so it's a matter of record. They really are saying this, so go ahead and read. Make sure it's yours, not mine, and oh heck, I'll read it too. When a country has fewer new COVID-19 cases emerging today than it did on a previous day, that's a sign that the country is flattening the curve. And so continuing, on a trend line of total cases, a flattened curve looks how it sounds, flat. On the charts on this page, which show new cases per day, a flattened curve will show a downward trend in the number of daily new cases. And more. But have you already picked up what they're saying constitutes flattening the curve? And it closes, and then we get to see if what they said is flattening the curve is really in their display, which I haven't even seen yet, so again, we share this moment together. So that's just new case charts, like fine. And that's the US and UK, each with a pretty picture to themselves, again confirm new daily cases. Fine, and seriously those charts like a bizarre hairdresser fail. Speaking of hairdresser fail, I'm sorry, but Hugh, have you ever seen a sea anemone floating, wafting in the water? Is her hair wafting? Why would you gel your hair to within an inch of its life, a totally impractical hairstyle, if you could just let it float around in 0G, unless 0G wasn't available? I mean seriously, I grew up with Apollo, loved it, travelled to Florida. Yep, from the UK it's not a 50-mile jaunt to watch a shuttle launch. Amazing thunder that just rolls on and on. And that's how sophisticated you get to fake your video broadcast hair gel? You've got to be kidding me. That's also how I feel seeing these slides. Here I am having to cover every base so thoroughly that no one can accuse me of peddling fake news and taking me down, when one of the most prestigious institutions in the world can apparently put up a few lame slides and lie to the public, because that's what this is, a simple, blatant, absurd lie. Seriously, it's like saying flattening the hair is why we go into space. Did you get what they were saying in their description of flattening the curve? Flattening the curve is just the fact that these charts aren't going to the moon. The first one there really has to send us back some pics. Do you get it? Any virus that does not grow exponentially and eradicate the human race only failed because of government action. And since no virus grows exponentially to be a threat to the human race, that means that the government can do anything it likes and claim it flattened the curve, according to John Hopkins at least. To think of the effort I put in to create ironclad proof that lockdown failed utterly in the UK. But if I'm the government or John Hopkins, I can just flat out lie and say, oh, that's not the virus, that was us, very much like Thomas Pueo. Are you seeing a narrative here? The virus is exponential. No virus is exponential, and reputable sites explain that lazy use of language. Massive threat to the nation, except that it's already been handled by Hubei in South Korea and the Far East, with barely a few hours worth of normal mortality. Total loss of democracy required while we cope with this, including lockdown, though the Far East and more enlightened European nations, not UK, didn't need any of that to sort this. Massive propaganda effort including shutting down any channel that threatens the agenda, so our truth lives by their grace and their lies are immune. For the FBI, police and investigators, the following is a formal demonstration of John Hopkins' deliberate misrepresentation of what constitutes flattening the curve, attributing a normal phenomenon to the government. Here's John Hopkins' definition that the country is flattening the curve. And here is Ferguson's chart of 510,000 deaths with no action by the government, the country. Where is it true on Ferguson's chart that there are fewer new Covid-19 cases emerging today than it did on a previous day? Here, immediately after peak on the UK black and US blue charts. It is the definition of peak. Yesterday's equals today's. It is the definition of post-peak or past peak. Today's are lower than yesterday's, and it happens as here with no government action. John Hopkins has stated that the purpose of lockdown and intervention, the whole flattening the curve, is to take credit for something that happens anyway in any virus contagion. The brightest minds on the planet at one of the world's most prestigious institutions, and they have no problem presenting an absurdity as fact, so that the gullible public can be impressed by government saving them for what was going to happen anyway. It is utter and outright fraud, pure and simple. Does the total curve, the sigmoid curve, look flat? Absolutely. Does it have anything to do with governments flattening the curve? Absolutely not. The looks how it sounds flat part of the curve is the inevitable result of any curve where the cases fall away to close to zero. John Hopkins are again stating that the government is entitled to take credit for something that is inevitable even if the government does nothing. And their final statement is back to dailies. New cases per day, a flattened curve, government intervention, will show a downward trend in the number of daily new cases. This is the Thomas Pueo trick, to claim that something that is already happening and intrinsic to virus contagion is actually thanks to government intervention. On the theoretical day cases, Ferguson's no intervention, it is this. And of course even Sweden, vilified for threatening the lockdown narrative, has got past peak, though its government is doing its utmost to disguise that and to prolong the nation's agony, as we've documented elsewhere. Natural events, according to the powerhouse of medical scientific knowledge, that is John Hopkins University of Medicine, do not occur naturally, but only at the whim of a creator government. I pity the patients to be treated by graduates from their school, because isn't this all too close to what we're seeing? You're not safe from the virus because you have a natural and powerful immune system. You must wait for the vaccine. You're not going to survive or get well from ordinary ailments. You must take our government-approved Big Pharma medicine. That's not me making that up. That is the logical inference from what John Hopkins are saying here, that a natural occurrence is evidence of government action. That John Hopkins should publish such an asinine description of flattening the curve that grants the government the God-given ability to sit back and do absolutely nothing and to take credit for it, or worse, to do absolutely anything and justify it entirely fraudulently, is beyond the pale. The home of the brightest people on the planet reduced to selling snake oil for profit, greed and tenure. It is utterly shameful. So each person on this list is on notice that they get to examine what we have to say, and then they get to recognize its trivial accuracy and they get to stand up and save lives, just like we're being told to do by fighting against the lies that it seems even the prestigious John Hopkins is happy to promote, by accident of course, I'm sure. Will they do so? I doubt it. Amazing how saving lives is just something we're supposed to do by giving up democracy. If you're the media, a scientist, a prestigious university, or the government itself, it's all about saving lives. Well, I call John Hopkins on this one, and if there is one honest FBI agent or judge or cop or authority in the United States, then I suggest you take the time to appreciate the material in this video. It isn't difficult, but the freedom and integrity of your nation depend on your taking action. Entirely up to you. If all the authorities fail to act, then I encourage all citizens of affected countries to consider that John Hopkins has deliberately or negligently misrepresented the most basic and fundamental facts and so contributed to the ease with which measures were taken against you, doing you and others personal harm and your nation immense harm. A rational, well-founded and well-informed strategy is highly desirable. A strategy based on lies and misrepresentation is fraud, civil or criminal, and if the police won't act, you still have the capacity to do so by creating a civil case against any such organisation. It's time to put all those ambulance-chasing lawyers to good use. There will be rich pickings, to borrow an Erin Brockovich phrase. If they won't understand truth, fairness and justice, maybe they'll understand threat of loss of money, perhaps the only thing they truly do understand. Apologies, I had a chart update imminent and some nifty US cities and states comparisons ready to go, plus episode 3 of Go No Go. But as you can see, such a prestigious institution flat out lying so brazenly just got to me. I'm still Andrew Mather, a 60-year-old Brit, mathematician, financier, technologist, husband, biker, pilot, healer, whatever. Feel free to get in touch, andrew@peerlessreads.com or andrew@amather.com. Either should get to me.